Live is good. Okay. So I'll just go ahead and get started. I'm Chris. This is the Sausage Sports Club weekly update. I do this every week. There's a few reasons I do it. One, I think it's a useful resource for students to see, or students or new developers or just people interested in indie games to see how an indie game is made, what kind of decisions and what kind of process I have for making a commercial indie game. I feel like I missed out on that resource when I was learning to make games, and it would have been really helpful to just see what other people were doing so I could either emulate that or just like be informed of what options were, or whatever. Another obvious reason is marketing. If I talk about the game every week, more people are likely to hear about it, and that's always good. 3 is a selfish reason of like in 5 or 10 years, I would like to be able to look back on my game making career and see like, oh, this is when I learned how to do this thing, or oh, I used to do that cool thing, why don't I do that anymore? And just like generally my memory is like pretty fuzzy for the distant past, so being able to actually like have video footage of you know, where I was at, what I was thinking about, and you know, each part of making the game is just like will be a cool record to have. And then the 4th reason is in doing these devlogs, I've had people come in and comment on my process if I'm doing something in a stupid way and say, oh, here's another better way to do that, or here's another option, or you know, here's a tool that solves the problem you're trying to solve yourself, and that's been really cool and useful. And so like outsourcing you know, crowdfunding my knowledge is like useful. So that's the 4th reason. I guess with that, I'll just get into the update. And yeah, this week was almost exclusively working on the overworld. I'm trying to finish it as much as I can so that I can just move on and do the programming stuff that's left, which isn't a lot. It's mostly just fixing bugs, and I think it's likely that there's like more performance I can get on Switch, and that's like most of it. There's also toys that I want to populate this overworld with, that for players to just play with. And until the overworld is done, it's kind of that's kind of a blocker of the game being finished. Whereas with toys, I could make like 10 toys, and that would be enough probably. But it's like, for toys, it's as much time as I want to put in, whereas the overworld is like, there's a set amount of time it requires, and until I finish it, I don't really know. So if you were here last week or weeks before, you'll notice that Hollywood is like, or Sportsville I should say, is getting a lot farther along. The kind of, this is kind of the entrance area where if you were coming to watch the Sausage Sports Club, like the idea is that it's a reality TV show, and if you were coming to watch the reality TV show, you would come into this production lot, and maybe there would be like, in one of these buildings, there would be like a live studio audience kind of thing, but it's not really live because you're not out in the world or whatever, but you could watch from the set or from the production lot. That's the idea. And it also kind of creates this narrative of this overworld or this place or whatever is a set up for the show, and that's you know, that's where I want it to be. And so I've been fleshing this out, making it look more like a production lot that might be in Hollywood, just trying to communicate like this one, this isn't a play area, 2, this is you know, what I just described, this is a production lot that enters into like what's basically a film set, and then yeah, and then it's part of Sportsville. That's the idea. So that's generally like that, and Hollywood, and then just like kind of improving everything a little bit is kind of what I've been working on this week in the overworld. But I'll go through my list here. mesh housekeeping. Last week I talked about how the overworld, like Maya scene file or whatever, was getting really large and having a bunch of unneeded data, or like a bunch of sub meshes that didn't need to have. And so I was doing housekeeping there, like cleaning it up, making it more simple, making it so instead of taking like a minute or a minute and a half to import the file every time I would update it, it went down to take like maybe like 8 seconds or something. I haven't timed it, but it was a lot shorter. In actually like going you know, taking the overworld to as close to completion as I can get, I realized that it would actually be preferable to have each of the biomes split up a little bit more. Previously, like this section with the grass, the desert ground over here, the beach, like the actual like sand of the beach, same with Hollywood and jungle, all of those are like one big combined mesh, and there's just a bunch of material swatches, and that's fine. Like I don't mind the draw calls or whatever, because the only other way to do it would be like a bunch of textures or like some crazy shader, and it's like having like 10 draw calls on that mesh is fine versus having to write some super complex expensive shader. Or yeah, so point being, I split this up into a bunch of sub meshes, or into a bunch of distinct meshes. So like the desert is like one piece, but I wanted to maintain the like connected feel of it, so that there's continuity of the mesh, there's no holes. So whereas for last week's update I talked about how I want to make this as simple as possible, make everything connected, make the mesh smooth and simple and everything like that. That was actually connecting it so that there are no gaps and stuff. Like even along this wall, this edge here is like one continuous edge flow, I guess. It's not combined anymore, but that's the idea. And I wanted to maintain that, so I worked with the entire overworld to make it all connected and fit together and make it simple as possible. And then I split it up into what I knew were going to be separate mesh areas, or separate materials or whatever. And there's a few benefits to that. One is if I'm in Hollywood looking this way, I don't need to draw. I don't need to pass all those verts or whatever to the graphics card. Like the desert's out of my view completely, the beach is out of my view completely. Unity's like frustum culling is gonna just like automatically get rid of that. So that's easy. That's a easy benefit. Another one is physics. This I use, and this might change, but it probably won't change. I use mesh colliders for the actual like ground collision with everything, just because it's the easiest, fastest way to make everything like collision-wise match exactly what you're seeing. And that's like obviously a desirable thing. If I were to manually author like collision meshes for stuff you can touch, it would take a long time. And if it will give me performance back, I might end up doing that. But really, these like my ground meshes aren't that complex, so there's some savings to be had, but not that much. If I were to cut out my own collision mesh, really the easiest thing I could do is just cut out the section that you would be in and then delete all the other stuff, and that would be like an easy win there for the desert at least, and for Sportsville I guess, depending on where I decide to force the player to stay in Sportsville. Whoops. Moving on. Okay, so I'm not sure what I showed last week of the castle interior. I guess I'll actually jump into it. Let's do day 4. Yeah, I'm not sure what I showed last week of the interiors, like what the state of things were. I imagine the castle was probably very early on. Probably wasn't much to it. Now it's still not done. Like there's a lot of like detailing and you'll see. There's a lot of stuff to be done that I haven't done yet, basically. Okay. We go in, but now it's an actual castle. It's like recognizably like stone walls, stone floor. There's like chandeliers you can knock around. There's a bunch of props. I did show in last week's after the weekly update last week, I did a work session where I worked on these like meat stick props. I did a little more work to get them complete. The texture is really simple after that work session, but I basically just worked on props that night and got the steak done, got the tomato done. But yeah, so this set is a bit more laid out, and there's still more work to do, but that's happening. I think probably the other two sets are like basically what I showed on stream maybe last week. The moon has low gravity. If you hit that button and you can like jump super high, there's these cool holes that you can hide in. Hey, welcome T-Money. So there's that. The music venue, I'm not sure that I worked on it at all this week. There's a lot to be done, just like look and feel, making this look like a cool music venue. It's already pretty fun to play with the stools. I have some ideas of other toys to be in this room, but I haven't gotten to those yet. This week I also worked on making the hay bales and barrels actually look like, you know, final game assets instead of just cylinders. I'm not 100% happy with how the hay bales look. They just look kind of like cheap props, and they're like only barely recognizable as hay bales, I would say. But they might end up shipping like this, just because it's like not a huge priority prop, and if they can pass as a hay bale, it's good enough. Next thing, yeah, the desert. I don't want to load back to a previous version of the overworld to show this difference, but I added a lot more space to these areas. Like this area specifically was a lot slimmer, like didn't go as far back, like depth wise, and it just makes it feel more like a space, and I have more room to put toys and stuff once I get to that. This is the same deal. I just spaced it out more so I can fit more stuff. I also, oh, that cactus looks weird. I'm gonna have to fix that. It's probably like intersecting with the wall. That's annoying. I bet there's a few cactuses that do this. But I increased the height of the wall so that it doesn't seem like you could get out of the map if you wanted to. I also added, in the entire overworld, I added like collision walls that will keep players where they're supposed to be, like where they're allowed to be. I don't think I increased the area here. Like I didn't pull out this wall at all, but I did add this fence to make sure players know like you can't get out to that back area. I did add a lot more rocks and just like pieces out there to make it look more like a real space. And that's the desert. First pass collision, yeah, I can show this. If you've ever played a game where you get stuck on an invisible wall, then this will be familiar to you. Basically, in pretty much every game, you want to keep the players, you know, where they're supposed to be. Thanks, T-Money. You want to keep the players where they're supposed to be, so you're going to want to put up collision walls that are a little bit overzealous, I would say, like that are more restrictive than the level geometry would necessarily communicate, just to make sure that the player can't like squeeze their way out anywhere that you would want. For me, my walls are super high and they go into the ground a good amount, but this is important to keep players from breaking out into this area where there's just nothing there for you, so it's not worth going out there. Same with the front of the overworld. If you were to like run towards the camera, jump over this fence, you would get to nothing, and there's nothing there for you, so there's no reason to go over there. But this was fun. I used ProBuilder for this, which is it's a level design tool that also has like 3D modeling stuff built into it. For me, the biggest thing is it's got an extrude tool, and I can freely move around verts and edges, and that's just like and it also lets me differentiate between colliders and detail meshes and stuff like that. Oh, it's got triggers. That's really cool. I didn't know that. Nice. That's awesome. I'll talk about that later. Don't want this to be a trigger. Yeah, collider's fine. Anyway, I use ProBuilder. I can do like a very fast demo of what that looks like. Just because it's been a pretty useful tool in general. I don't just use it for collision. I also use it to block out new arenas when I'm in that kind of phase. So yeah, you can just grab faces and you can pull them around. For me, my workflow is like, grab a face, I do Control E to extrude, and I drag this thing, rotate it. You really want to make sure to only rotate on around this green circle, so that you're not getting like weird, so you're not getting this. And you could if you wanted to do that, but that's not, for these collision walls at least, I want to make sure they're all like the same height all the way across. Yeah, so that's ProBuilder. It's pretty cool. Yeah, let's get back to the list. So I added that for pretty much everywhere. As far as I know, there's nowhere you can get out of the map, but my QA, Bryce, a friend of mine that I've been contracting to do QA and just like break the game and tell me where I need to fix it, they will find places to get out, I'm sure, and I'll fix those. New stuff, I guess this is new since last week. It feels like it's been there a while to me, but behind Sportsville there's like these giant grassy plains, and behind the first set of mountains in the jungle there's another set of mountains. And I was noticing sometimes I would get to an angle where it would be really obvious to me, or it would stand out that there didn't seem to be anything in the distance. It just seemed to be like, here's one hill and then the world is an endless void. And just adding this like small amount of extra ground with plains and this mountain region really helped like sell that I don't know, this is a real space. Like it's not it's not just a scene in a game, it's more of a space. And I might end up doing the same thing with the desert, but because these walls are so high, I haven't really had that feeling as much. And this is the same reason that the water goes so far. I was having that same feeling with the water. And just like making that plane, it's not a plane, but making this mesh so far out really makes it feel like an island. Even though over here you can see that it's like, this would be more of a shore than an island. Anyway, let's move on to the next thing. Okay, fixes a weird hole between Hub and Hollywood. So let me turn off the collision layer. For a long time of working on the overworld, there were two main problems. One was I never put in a front wall to the hub, so you could just walk off the front of the map, and it made the overworld feel very incomplete, very prototypey. Like I submitted one version of the game to Nintendo for certification, you know, to release, and I knew the game wasn't in a shippable state then. I knew it wasn't going to pass, but I wanted to go through the process once to see what kind of things they would flag for, and just generally like be aware of all the processes. And that was one of the things they flagged on, is like, hey, you can walk off the front of the map, which was a little bit surprising to me that they would actually like consider the game content rather than just like whether it crashes or breaks or if it's like usable. So that was like a good learning experience. I knew I was never going to ship that way. Kind of getting out the weeds. Anyway, that was one big thing, and the other big thing was between Hollywood and the hub, I could never figure out how to actually like match those two together, because the entrance to Hollywood is so much wider than the entrance to the other sections. And as either Hollywood or what it eventually became as like a Western movie set with like Hollywood attachments, I could never figure out a way to have like a wall between those that, one, you couldn't get on top of, and two, like had some realistic reason for being there. Like if it was just a fence, I would have to like end this grass. The grass would have to continue, or the Western stuff would have to like intersect the grass somewhere, which is like not really neat in the same way that the desert like rocky sand can like cut off, or the rocks of the beach can cut off, or the jungle's kind of sheer cliff face can cut off. And so it was just like really weird. Let's see. I'll jump back to last week just to see what it looked like. I don't think it'll take too long. Sure, do what you do. But it looked really bad, and it's now fixed. And the fix for that was several iterations of pulling back the entrance lot up here, like closer and closer to the hub, and I had to like rearrange a lot of the Western set, just like turning this building and like pulling it back and forth, and I actually ended up pushing it really far, like depth. I can't move here, but like along the Z here, I pushed it back way farther and pulled in the back side of it, because the interior didn't require, like it was only using like 75% of the depth of the building, so I was able to pull it in a bit, and that was cool. Let's see what it was before. No, still gonna go. Okay. I mentioned the better hay and barrels. That was just like doing a pass of modeling and UVs and textures. No big deal. Maybe I can. Yeah, I do have those up. Shit. I'll grab those. Oh, because I just jumped back on my repo. I can't get those files. That's funny. Okay, so the lighting is fucked up because I jumped back, but you can see there's like this weird gap. I was trying a bunch of different ideas to fill that and to connect this with the Western set without thematically like mixing those two things, and it was kind of weird. This looks interesting without lighting. I don't usually see it like this. Okay, I'm gonna jump back. Clean all those changes. Okay. So more polygons on the hat shop. Am I good? Yeah, let that do its thing. I'll open the hat shop. I gotta find that. Castle, overworld. Oh, the hat shop exterior. Yes, okay. Boom. So I did a couple things here with the hat shop that I can show. Previously the mesh was pretty simple. It was basically like this with smoothed edges. Let me do here, I'll do like this, just to show what's going on. So it looked like this, I think. The fuck, are the normals locked now? There we go. So it was basically like this, like amount of complexity, and at certain angles you could see, like at this kind of angle, you could see how low poly it was on the bottom one. And it didn't look great to me. You can especially see this on the rim, on the brim, I mean, of the hat. It looks real bad. Okay, there we go. Yeah, so you can see it looks really shitty. I had been looking at that for like, I don't know, like 3 months or something, and just occasionally seeing it and being annoyed by it. What is up with this? Interesting. So now there's a lot more edge flow. Looks like I need to actually smooth the normals and like re-export it. There's some weirdness. I feel like I should just smooth the whole damn thing and then go back over it. We'll get there. Yeah, I think I do need to go into the real version and smooth it. It's got some weird normals on it. Anyway, I just like smoothed this guy, and it looks a lot better in game. And I also I guess I deleted it now, but the other mesh that we were looking at that was lower poly, that was the actual collision mesh. I had just been using like a full res mesh collider, and it just was, I didn't notice any performance issues from it, but it was like, it's like death from 1,000 cuts basically. Like if I can simplify everything a little bit, it'll make everything run a bit faster. So it looks better. These weird artifacts, or whatever you want to call them, I think are because of the normals not being smooth in the right spots. So in the work session, that'll be the first thing I do. Just writing it down. Okay, fix quest locations in Hollywood. So if you're not familiar, the adventure mode in Sausage Sports Club has you go on a season of a day, like goes on, you go on 4 days of a season of the show Sausage Sports Club. On each day you do several quests where you talk to NPCs in the world and help them solve interpersonal dramas. The way this is set up in the world is NPCs, there's like a payload for each quest that defines which NPCs spawn, and the quests, when they're included in a day of adventure mode, are kind of procedurally placed in the world at different quest locations, and they're only allowed to be placed in biomes you've unlocked by going through the season, and they're placed at specific quest locations I've set up in the world, so that if you know the world well, and if you know where people tend to spawn, you can find characters more quickly. And they've also got these like question marks that you can see through buildings. So I went through and actually like set up all of the quest locations for Hollywood. So some of the characters are like a part of the quest, but they're like part 2, so you don't start by talking to them. You like come back later. Move my table down a bit. Yes, you come back later. So this guy is like part of a quest, but you don't know which one, and you'll have to come back later to like figure that out. Previously, before I had fixed these, oh, this is interesting, like in the wall. Before I had fixed these, they were like set up from when I had just like blocked in what the overworld was going to be and just like drop quest locations in arbitrary places, so NPCs were spawning like in the ground or sideways or like in the side of a building or 2 feet in the air. And this makes it a lot better. His voice is kind of quiet. So we gotta go find Bonbon. I think Bonbon's over here, yeah. I'm serious, the poem isn't about you, it's my art. Let's play for it. Yaga yaga yaga. Oh boy, I broke Tiny Tokyo again. The lighting's all messed up here. It looks like the level's fine, but man, that sucks. Maybe it's just a reflection probe that's messed up. Looks really bad without that reflection probe though. I can't quit. That's weird. Okay. So that's all the overworld stuff I did this week. On a broad level, I could dig into like boring minutia stuff, but I don't want to get that granular. Some other stuff that happened this week that is kind of I think would be useful to hear about to other people. One, I realized, and this was based on like a practice they do at Alchemy, where in the project there's a bunch of materials that are called like test red, test blue, test green, whatever. And these are just like a library of materials that you can use when you're making a prototype, and you don't have to make a new material, you don't have to worry about it, you don't have to think too hard about the colors. You just search test green and then you can drag that onto your thing. And it's great because if this library is big enough, then you basically never have to, you know, create these materials. You don't have to when you get leg into a project, you won't have to worry about having just like a million unused materials that were like prototype things and you don't remember why they were used. You don't have to worry about deleting them. You know, this is my library of test materials. And I finally ran into a situation where I was like, man, I wish I didn't have to create a new material for every single thing I did when I'm making a prototype. And you know, and I don't want it to be just like the default standard material. So I went through and started making that stuff. I also realized that there would be a lot of cases where I was testing a shader or setting up a material for a new thing, and I have a texture parameter, and it's not a color parameter, and I don't want to change the shader to switch it to a color parameter, so I can just make it an arbitrary value. And so I need to drop in like, I want this whole metallic input to be just black, but I didn't have a black texture. I want it to be like 50% between black and white, or 25% from black to white, gray. And that was like a common problem that I've had, and I never really went through the very simple step to solve it of just exporting a bunch of very small textures that are, you know, like a 4x4 texture that's 50% gray, or 25% gray, or 75% gray, or whatever, or black or white. And I feel like this must have happened like 30 times during the project, where I wanted you know, I wanted a white texture, and I'd search in the project, white square, you know, a bunch of different things, and it's like, why don't I have this? So if you're working on a project, I would recommend importing a bunch of just like very small, simple textures, you know, a gradient of black to white, you know, like a red, green, blue would be good. That's useful for testing shaders. And then also having just a material, like a test material library that's easy to search for. You don't you like set the colors up once, don't ever change them, because if there's a bunch of stuff in your game using those test materials and you change it, then it's going to affect all of the things that have that material. So that's a thing. The other thing that I learned about this week, and I don't know how it took me this long to learn this, but you can make a convex mesh collider into a trigger. And if you're not familiar, let me find, here's an example of that. This mesh collider is like my trigger that when the player, or any dynamic object enters it, there's a splash effect, like VFX particle, that gets created on the surface of this water. If you're entering the trigger, the splash goes up as if you're jumping into the water, and if you're exiting the trigger, a splash, another VFX plays, because there's water looks different when you're jumping in or out of it. And this trigger, having this convex trigger, is great because this like the shape of this water isn't really close enough to a box and or a bunch of capsules or spheres or anything, and it's this like body of water is high enough on a slope and kind of slopes down from either side. So if I tried to use a box collider, it's likely that the box would kind of clip out of the ground, and so if the player is walking alongside this, they might enter the trigger, cause a splash like on this weird part of the sandy beach, and that's not ideal. So this trigger is really useful. The other huge benefit is the other solution you might have to this, if you don't want to use one big box, is have multiple boxes like placed, aligned together to make the shape of this thing, and that's fine. That's what I did for a long time, and in some cases it's useful. When you're making a collider, if you're making like a physics object, like I have a banana over here that's just like a bunch of capsules, and that works great for that. But when you're using a trigger gets called every time you enter any collider, like the Unity callback on trigger enter. That gets called anytime you enter any trigger on an object, not once you enter the combined entirety of the collider triggers. So if I laid out 4 boxes trying to resemble this shape, and I jumped into it and walked across it, I would get 4 on trigger enters, because each collider would get that callback, would send that callback to my rigid body and my whatever script on my rigid body. And that's not what you want. Like that would feel really weird, and and for a long time I thought, oh, this is just like non-ideal, feature of the engine. Like I don't want it to work this way. I could do some workaround. I actually built a workaround which I call an overlap sensor, where I can define either a sphere shape or a box shape, and every update it will do a box cast over the shape of the collider you've set up, either a box or a circle or a sphere, sorry. And then it'll just maintain a list of all the things that were in that during that overlap. And that worked fine, but it's not, I would say it's not performant to have a bunch of those happening every update. In some scenes I would have maybe 5 or 6 of those overlap boxes happening every update, and that's starting to add up. So I discovered this week, the convex mesh trigger, which solves the problem. Yeah, it solves several problems. Like you can use it to avoid the problem of the multiple box colliders each triggering your thing, and it also because you can make it fit the shape of the thing you're doing. There's obviously the limitation of it being a convex shape, but that's less of a limitation than the rigid shape of a box or the rigid shape of a sphere. So that's super useful, and it's I was worried about it being non-performing or not reliable, and it's really like if you don't, if it's not moving, if it's not overlapping with every, you know, if the layer is set to not overlap with everything in the world, and your convex mesh isn't that complicated, then it's good. I'm happy with the solution. The other situation where I wanted this feature and I didn't know it existed, so I made another solution, was for kind of triggering music to happen. And the gist is, like, when I enter the desert, there's like an ambient track I want to play, and I want to transition to the desert version of the overworld theme. And since I didn't know about these convex mesh triggers, what I had to do is just make a, where is it? Let's do sound. Oh, it's not on the sound triggers layer anymore. Player sensor now. There it is. Okay, so I had to make these exit and enter triggers where the C, that's weird. So when you enter the blue, it starts playing the sounds of whatever is inside that biome. And when you enter the purple trigger, it stops playing whatever sound is inside that biome. So it's mostly usable for like, I want to play an ambient desert track when I go in there. And that's fine, but if somehow the player found a way to get into that biome without going through this trigger, or let's say they go to the junkyard arena by going over to this trigger and entering it there, and then they spawn back in, that ambient, this is a bug that I'm thinking about now. That music, both the music and the sound effects aren't going to be playing because they never overlap that trigger to start playing the sound, and that's like not great. So I should fix that. I'm gonna make a Trello card for myself so I remember that that's a thing. Bug loading from an arena entrance to the overworld doesn't start that biome's ambience. Okay, so that's a thing. Let's see what else we got. I think that's all the stuff that was on my list of, like, this is what I did this week, or stuff I learned this week. This big thing. I was hoping, honestly, that I would be more finished with the Hollywood biome by the end of last weekend, but it kind of snuck up on me, and I was putting off working on the entrance part because it, for some reason, when I get into it takes me a while to get into the level design mode of just like blocking in shapes and trying things and experimenting a lot. I always want to just do it in one shot and like have a very clear picture in my head of what it's going to be. And until I feel like I have that, I have trouble getting started. And usually what happens is I'll try to come up with this perfect picture in my head, I'll draw pictures, and I'll think about it a lot, and I'll like keep procrastinating, like not really fully investing in working on it until I'm like, okay, this is getting ridiculous, I'm spending way too much time on this, like I'm not really doing any work. And then I'll actually be like, I'm just gonna get in the engine and block shit out, and that's when really I do the work. Like really I start to make progress, is I just am moving stuff around in Maya or in Engine, and I can think, oh, this looks alright, but if I turned it the other way, it would look better, or oh, if I added an awning here, that would look better, or if I extruded this like piece here, it would look better, or if I added a, you know, like a darker color base or whatever, and I can use that along all the buildings to have the same visual language for this area. these are all steps that happened as I was making this. But it took me to be in front of Maya and having shapes there to play with before I could actually really do any level design work. And I would say in general across this project, that's been something I've had to learn, is that you can only do so much work on paper, and most of the level design work is going to happen when you're, you know, in the space, moving stuff around, playing in the medium. I don't remember how I got onto that tangent. Oh yeah, I wanted to get more done, but I didn't. That's funny. So here's more stuff I need to do in the overworld before it's done. Toys is like a big one that's kind of separate. So looking at Hollywood here, need to add product. And this is annoying. I wish I could dock this and force it to be on top. Add production, set stuff to inner area. So this spot right here is technically in the production studio area. Like, this is where directors and riggers and PAs and I don't know all of the people that work on a film. Maybe the actors would hang out if they were actors and they weren't just the characters. But this is where they would hang out, so I'm going to put some director's chairs, and I might do like a tent with tables or whatever, but I just need to get in there and start playing with primitives and trying things out. But that's what that one means. I need to block in the entrance more explicitly. What that means is when a player walks up to this spot, it doesn't really, even though there's like a blocker, it doesn't really look like you're blocked in. So there's a couple options. One that I think would be funny is to put a trigger here, and if the player gets in the trigger, start a dialogue with this building. It's just like, hey, you can't leave, like we're filming here, or something like that. And then your character is taken over and forced to walk back into the, you know, into the like play area. Might do that. It'd be pretty quick to set up. Fix camera behind the Western Building 1. That's like this area here. I'm kind of scrolling with my mouse. If you walk in this area, the camera is kind of like right along the top edge of this building. Hey, thanks, Fishrock. 123. Welcome. The camera kind of is at a high angle, but it's not. If you get too close to the building, you can lose sight of your character, and it feels a little bit weird. So I need to tweak that a bit. And if I show the camera zones, you can kind of see why this happens. Yeah, you can see the preview in the bottom right over here. Yeah, the camera is up there and the player can get obscured. It doesn't really bother me that the camera can get obscured. What bothers me is when I go from here to this. Now suddenly I like can't really see my player that well because they're like under here, and the camera transition between this and this is like not that smooth. I'm not sure what my solution is going to be. Something I realized once I discovered that trigger, the convex trigger thing, is that for my camera zones, now that I understand that that's how that works, I don't need them to be boxes anymore. Previously, like I didn't know that existed, so I had to make my camera zones boxes, and I'm not even relying on Unity's physics system for the camera zones anymore. I just like, I might get some performance back from this too, but now I just iterate over all of the camera zones in the scene, and if I'm overlapping one, then that's the one that takes over. But I could change it to be, you know, an on trigger enter thing. Like that's when you take over the camera, and that will allow me to make a smooth, not a smooth, but a convex mesh here. Kind of, maybe not, because it's got a round around this building. I guess I could pull in the zone here. It could be convex. I don't know. Basically, like I'm gonna I don't want to overhaul the camera zone system because it's like kind of at a mature place, and if I change how the collision happens, it might not be a smooth transition, and I would rather ship the game with this than be forced to like overhaul it in that way. Really getting into the weeds on some of these. Decide how to block the Sportsville sign. Okay, so as you're walking through this area, the Sportsville sign is almost always in your view, and that's on purpose. I want you to see it so that you get the vibe that this is like Hollywood. It's like a movie set. It's like a movie production lot. But when you can see the sign, it's lit like this. You kind of want to go play with it. And if I let you play with it, that's fine. Like, it's fun to jump on, and the colliders are like interesting. You can like put your head through some of the letters, and it's cool. But you can leave. You can like you can go off into the wild blue yonder. And if you're up on the top of this hill, you can also, by looking in this direction, you can see that it's not endless. It's, you know, it's a finite structure, and I don't really like that. So I kind of am at a weird sticking point with this, where I have a few options of, one option is I can block off this section with fence and not let you go back there. Another option is I can block off the top hill of this with a fence and not let you go all the way up there, or even like 2/3 of this hill. But that kind of disrupts the feel of Sportsville. It doesn't feel like Hollywood if there's a fence blocking in your view, because that's not what Hollywood hills look like. So that's kind of not an ideal solution for me. The other benefit is that these bushes are like a fun shape to be inside, because there's not a collider on them, and you can hide from your friends. Or I have a prototype version of this where if you're inside of a trigger on one of these bushes and it detects any movement from your player, then the bush will like wiggle a little bit. Could you make where if you go out far enough there is just a big ocean? That's what it's like over here on the beach. And I could wrap the beach, I could wrap the water around behind Hollywood, but that would have the same problem of making it feel not like Hollywood, because you would be able to see, you know, you'd be able to see the water stretching out forever. I'm really trying to make sure players know and recognize like this is supposed to be like Hollywood. But thanks for the suggestion, Did You Fudge, and welcome. Yeah. Anyway, these bushes, I have a prototype where if you're in them and it detects any player input, whether that's moving or wiggling your head or jumping or dashing or whatever, the bush will like jiggle a little bit, and that's fun because you could play hide and seek with your friends, and then if you see a bush jiggle, you're like, oh, I know you're in that bush, and they know that you know that they're in the bush, so they can like run, and I don't know, it's fun. It's like a fun toy. So that's something I need to figure out still. Arena entrances. I've talked about this before, but you'll notice that the arenas are white cylinders with a point on the top, except for the junkyard, which is an actual junkyard entrance already. I'm gonna get rid of player sensors. There we go. And camera zones. Okay. Yeah though. What was the next one? Arena entrances. Yeah, so I need to, and I think I'm gonna do this on a work session stream tonight. I want to concept out. I'll just take a screenshot of what, you know, I'll take a screenshot of this and then just paint over in Photoshop what I think what the entrance could look like. Same with that one, same with the bug museum, and then I'll just block them in and iterate on them over time. But that's a thing that I think that's going to probably take longer than I expect, because each of those is a hero prop and is likely to have multiple materials and needs to be like detailed enough and interesting enough that players want to go to it, but it also should read as the thing that it is. And like with the aquarium is an interior space, so I have to make the exterior to that like tells what the interior is. A hut. Yeah, I've been thinking of maybe a fishbowl, but I don't know what it's gonna be yet. Fleshing out each hollowed interior. There's still, like I mentioned with the castle, there's still like a lot of detailing. This is going to be a fireplace that's, I'd like it to be pretty detailed and an interesting shape. I don't know for sure what the rest is going to be, but it's definitely going to be more complex. Like I'm going to add more details than what's here. I'd like to do some banners. I don't know what's going to be on them. Maybe that could be like different character silhouettes or something. The moon I'm especially worried about because the background in here is just a black wall, and the few things I've tried don't really give it a sense of place in the same way the other two do. You can tell it's the moon right now, but it doesn't feel like the set of a moon. It feels like a black room with like moon rocks and like a wavy terrain. So it's not ideal. The music, obviously the music venue needs more stuff, but whatever. So this is getting into more detailing, I think. But the beach to me right now is looking pretty basic, is the word I would use. And so I want to add seashells and foliage, and I wrote this decal system a long time ago that I think would be really useful for just putting like moss down along rocks or like along the ground. So I want to try that out, see how it works, see how it affects performance. It's a little, if I remember right, it's a little bit shitty on performance because it doesn't call if it's outside of your view, and depending on how many I draw, that could add up really quick. I like how this gradient looks, this height gradient. Yeah, what else we got? Beach toys. Yeah, the volleyball net and the swings just look crap right now. Tree fruit. So I have these I have these fruit in the jungle, and they're just in a pile right now, and that's not really ideal. And what I would like to do is attach them to trees, and if you kick the tree will like shake a little bit, and if you do it maybe 2 or 3 times, then the fruit falls out and you can knock them around or whatever. One issue with this is that the trees are pretty tall right now, and until they're lower, like I can't really do that. The other issue is that the trees are all statically batched, which means that at the start, when you start this level, when you load into the overworld, all of the trees are mushed together into one big mesh and drawn together, which means I can't rotate a singular tree, which means for trees that will have fruit on them, I just need to, I need to mark them as not batching static. So it'll be separate, make them shorter. So that's gonna have a little bit of performance cost, but the ones that aren't batched will be instanced, so it might balance out. It's hard to say. Treehouse art, bridge physics. Yeah, these look like crap right now. They're just white. I had them textured at one point, but it was not a texture that fit. It was like not what I'm looking for. And the surface of this top, I don't have a tree ring texture for it yet, so I gotta make one of those. And then yeah, the bridges don't really feel right yet. I need to just iterate on that. And then I'm thinking about adding junk, like trash stuff near the junkyard, just because it's fun to play with stuff, and I don't do a good job of communicating what kind of arena this is, or even necessarily that you can go into this building. So that could go with some doing. Could use some doing. Or toys. This was the stuff I wanted to get done this weekend. Not quite there yet. But yeah, that's the weekly update. Happy to answer questions if you have them. Otherwise, I'm gonna take a little bit of a break and then probably come back for a work session for a couple hours. That's what's going on this week. No questions from you? Cool. Just gonna double check the Twitch chat. Sometimes I feel like the comments don't come through. Okay, yeah, no big deal. So we hit on the last. Cool, thanks, Angel. So on last week's stream we hit 100 followers here, and that's really cool. I didn't expect to to have that many, especially like only doing once a week streams. I didn't expect to have that many viewers. So thanks for tuning in and making it fun to do this stream. So it's always more fun to have people in chat and have regular viewers. So appreciate you coming by. And if you haven't followed yet, feel free to do that. I pretty much only stream once a week, and maybe like occasionally I'll do like a work session in the middle of the week, so you won't get too many notifications. And if you have any questions about dev stuff, or if there's a part of my workflow that you'd be interested to see, let me know. I'm usually happy to go over that stuff. Otherwise, I'm going to take a break for a bit and then come back and do a work session. Just let me know.